Do I gather that you recognize me?
I recognize what you appear to be.
And appearances can be most deceiving. But not in this case, James Kirk. I am Abraham Lincoln.
Bridge to all decks, or should I say, help me, Spock! Welcome to a brand new episode of Enterprise Incidents with Scott and Steve and John.
Hello.
Hello, John Roca, and welcome back to Enterprise Incidents.
It's my pleasure. I'm sitting here in Lincoln's throne. Very excited to be hanging out with you guys and having some fun talking about one of my favorite episodes. My name is John Roca, and I'm here to defend the Savage Curtain to all people who would criticize this episode. And I have read some bad reviews in preparation for this conversation, and I am here to set the record straight about this episode to a lot of those people who vilify this thing. So I'm very excited to be on the show with you all.
Well, the outlaw has spoken. If the outlaw says he's here to defend something, then you better be ready. But here's the thing. Fellas. You say, John, you have to defend this episode. You don't have to defend it from me. I really like the Savage Curtain. Yeah. But the question is for you, John. You know, we were trying to figure out the next great episode for John to join us, because he joined us on the 2-part episode, which is a masterpiece, The Menagerie, and also on Journey to Babel, which is also a masterpiece, and
on Space Seed.
And Space Seed, of course, Space Seed. Like, these are all top tier episodes. So,
very hard.
When it came to the next episode, John, that you wanted to do for us, what was it about the Savage Curtain that made you go, that's the one?
Growing up as a kid, watching the original series, obviously in rebroadcasts, this was the episode that I've always remembered because of Lincoln, because I was a massive Lincoln fan growing up as a kid. He was the first president I was ever really kind of connected to, the good he did in terms of freeing the slaves and the Civil War and all of that. So for me, in our house, Lincoln was a very revered president. So when he showed up in this episode, when I saw this episode, I was probably 10, 11, 12, something like that when I saw it, it put the zap in me, but good. And as I got older and I've revisited this episode, there's still so much you can take from this episode that I think people unfairly try to minimize, because it offers a lot of interesting concepts. It is not just good versus evil. It is all this other stuff that is going on in between the lines of the good versus evil construct that they've set up here. And so I remember just as a kid being in love with this episode. And then what Kirk says, having to watch Lincoln die again, that was really hard for me. And watching it again, I'm not gonna lie to you, I got emotional because you can feel that in Kirk's face and in his rage when he goes and tackles Colonel Green. You know he wants to finish this guy off. So there's a lot here that I just remember being a kid and having the zap put in me, but good for this episode.
For sure. Then that certainly sounds like you are the right one to join us for this conversation. Of course, every conversation, but especially this one. My friend and partner, Steve Morris, on Enterprise Incidents. What do you think of the Savage Curtain? How have you felt about it? How do you feel about it now?
Well, it's funny. I had a very similar thought as what John was just talking about, which is I'm watching it on our rewatch, and I suddenly went, wait, is this where I first gained my love of Abraham Lincoln? I think, because if I started watching Star Trek at 6, 7, 8, somewhere around that age, I probably would have heard of Abraham Lincoln, but I wouldn't have known much about him. I think this was the most intimate, introduction to that person that I ever had. And I think I always, liked parts of it. And watching it this time, what's so fun, here's how I will put it. I don't think as a plot, as a story, this whole thing works. Mm-hmm. But there are things in it that I really, really like. Yeah. I find it enjoyable to watch.
I could not agree more with you, Steve. I could not agree more with you, John. What's interesting about the Savage Curtain is this. Well, first of all, I have to say that just like I learned the preamble to the Constitution because of Star Trek, watching the Omega Gory, just like I learned all about Shakespeare by watching The Conscience of the King, I, like you, Steve, and you, John, learned who Abraham Lincoln was, not in school, but because of Star Trek. And, I think people listening, if you're as old as we are, maybe you relate and feel the same way. Otherwise, you probably think we're completely illiterate and uneducated and out of our minds. But when it came to watching The Savage Curtain again, I realized that this is another episode like a lot of these late third season episodes, John and Steve, that I don't watch very often. And Savage Curtain, I have not seen in a very, very long time. But what I remember about it is that when I do watch it, I do enjoy it. Because like you pointed out, Steve, there are a lot of things that are really good about it. You know, when it comes to just the overall concept of it, is it a sort of inferior rehash of Arena and Gamesters of Triskelion and Spectre of the Gun? Sure, a lot of the issues and themes that are explored in The Savage Curtain were explored better with better payoffs in those episodes, especially Arena. But when we get into this conversation and we get to those moments that make me go, yes, to The Savage Curtain, then that means really that I was so happy to get to this episode on our deep dive conversation. And of course, watching these episodes in production order and just doing these really, really, really deep dives into these episodes and looking at elements that evolve. And there are elements here, but The Savage Curtain aired for the first time. First of all, I just got to say, this is our third to the last episode of the original series that we are covering on Enterprise Incidents. I mean, John, you were there back in the beginning of the first season when we did the Menagerie and Space Seed, and we felt like, wow, we still got a long way to go here on Enterprise Incidents. But now we have, like, literally, this is our third to the last episode, which, like, it makes me feel very emotional. It is a bittersweet feeling, but also very rewarding that, Steve, we've managed to accomplish this. The episode, The Savage Curtain, aired for the first time March 7th, 1969, the 77th episode to air, but it was the 78th episode to film, filmed over 7 days between December 11th and December 19th. So it went 1 day over schedule. Now, for the end of the third season, because the production order was cut from 26 to 24, the per episode budget was actually increased to $181,692. But Savage Curtain came in costing $192,023, making it more than $10,000 over budget. But you could see it in the fact that there are a lot of extras, guest stars, and the production values. The score is tracked. It was directed by Herschel Dougherty, who directed the first season episode, Operation Annihilate. And this is one of the things that I loved is when you're watching the episode and you come in for the beginning of the first act, you see the title card that says Story by Gene Roddenberry, Teleplay by Gene Roddenberry and Arthur Heinemann. Heinemann worked on the third season teleplays Wink of an Eye and The Way to Eden. Now, Gene Roddenberry's concept for Star Trek from back in March of 1964 included the pitch, Mr. Socrates. That made its way into this episode, even though Socrates did not. Then Roddenberry did his story outline on May 8th, 1968. He proceeded to a first draft teleplay on September 11th, but only wrote the first half of the script because he moved on to these other two movies that he was producing. So Arthur Heinemann proceeded to a second draft teleplay by November 27th. Arthur Singer did a script polish, his final draft on December 6th. And then Fred Freiberger, the producer of the third season, did his page revisions on December 9th, 10th, 12th, and 13th.
Would you like to know what was going on in the world?
Sure.
As you said, it was filmed December 11th through the 19th of 1968. On December 11th, President-elect Richard Nixon introduced his cabinet to the American people on national TV, just a sign of how much more televised things are becoming. On December 15th, Scott, you are from the great city of Philadelphia. Is that correct?
That is where I was born and raised, my friend.
Here is a thing I did not know about your football team, the Philadelphia Eagles.
Okay.
They were not having a good season in 1968. And at the end of their final home game, they got so angry that they started throwing snowballs at someone who came on the field. Do you know who that person was?
No.
John knows, apparently.
Yeah. Santa Claus.
What? Are you kidding
This
me?
is a legend in the sports world. and still referenced in 2022 in sports talk and in sports conversations, how the Philadelphia Eagles fans turned on Santa Claus and started throwing snowballs at him as he was coming on the field.
Oh my God. Oh my God, that's crazy. But you know what? That is very, very much Philadelphia. I got that.
So this one is kind of crazy to read, which is on December 16th, Spain rescinded the Alhambra Decree. Now, my guess is neither of you know. I didn't know what the Alhambra Decree was. The year the Alhambra Decree was made was 1492.
Oof.
Oh.
And it was a decree expelling all Jews from Spain.
Wow.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the Spanish Inquisition. This is when Jews were given the choice of either convert to Christianity or be killed or leave. And in Spain at that time, there were 600,000 Jews. In 1968, when the decree was rescinded, there were 8,500 Jews left in Spain.
The Inquisition. Here we go.
I mean, it's just like, it's like recently there was some law in some state passed finally outlawing slavery. It's like, really, it took you until 1968 to rescind the Alhambra Decree.
Oh, God.
This one's absolutely crazy, which is on December 17th, a millionaire heiress, Barbara Jane Mackey, was kidnapped, chloroformed, buried alive in a fiberglass reinforced box. It just had a battery-operated air pump and a lamp, and it was $500,000 ransom was demanded. The first drop was botched. The second drop was made, and finally, 3 days later, the money was paid off, and a switchboard operator at the FBI got directions to the burial site, and 100 FBI agents went around digging with their bare hands trying to find her. Wow. And they found her unharmed but very dehydrated after spending 3 days underground in a fiberglass box.
How is that not a documentary? Wow.
Apparently, there have been at least 3 movies made.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Okay.
But that story is just absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And then this one is also just kind of bizarre, which is on December 18th, both President Lyndon Johnson and Vice President Hubert Humphrey were simultaneously hospitalized with the Hong Kong flu, which was the worst pandemic since 1957. 750,000 people died. And it's just so crazy to read about, a pandemic and both the president and the vice president being hospitalized. That's really scary.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we topped them with this one, didn't we?
Yeah, we win. So would you like to get into the Savage Curtain?
I can't wait to get into the Savage Curtain with Johnny Roca.
Let's do it.
So we're orbiting some planet, and I'm going to just kind of go through this a little faster, which is that it's covered in lava. We've rumors of life forms. They seem to have a lot of power being generated.
Which would indicate a considerable civilization there.
What's all this poppycock about life forms on this planet, Spock?
You know what's interesting about the biofeedback of everyone on the bridge? So here we are, we're at the third to the last episode, which means we're nearing the end of the 5-year mission, because the first number in the star date indicates the year of the mission that the Enterprise is on. So the start date in this episode starts with the 5. So, and it's actually like 5/9 something. So they're close to the end of the mission. Spock is just like casually looking in his sensors, looking at his instruments and everything. And Kirk is like sitting on his captain's chair, just resting his head on his hand. And he looks over at Spock and he just casually goes over to Spock. This is starting off anyway, as a very routine mission. They're exploring a strange new world with things that they cannot explain about it.
And we're saying, okay, I guess we didn't really find anything. And then suddenly, red alert. And then we look out on the view screen and there is a figure coming towards them. And it is Abraham Lincoln, looking like he is sitting in his chair at the, in the mall in Washington.
Yeah.
I just have a question about this.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of questions. Was he floating in space? Is that what we're supposed to think?
Okay, John, what do you think? You go first.
No, I don't think he was floating in space. I think actually it's a projected image, and he is down on the planet in that, because he actually says after their interaction, find me in 12 and 1/2 minute to beam me aboard. So I think it's just a projection in space. And I've seen some criticisms saying that he was floating in space, and he's not. I think it's a projection put up on the screen, because clearly what we find out from that rock creature down on the planet, That rock creature is very capable of some audio visual exercises. So I'm just saying, he's got great AV equipment. So
I agree. And the other thing about this is I had vivid memories from when I saw this when I was a kid, and definitely a vivid memory when I watched this just recently. It's like when you first see that image coming to the screen, and then it transforms and materializes as Lincoln. I just remember thinking, "Oh, this is cheesy. This is silly." So really, Star Trek Captain Kirk meets Lincoln. I mean, really, it's such a silly concept. But what's actually really great, the strength about this episode is that it overcomes that very, very quickly when it really embraces what Star Trek has always been about and everything that Star Trek stood for. So to overcome the silliness, to overcome like what could have been like a Lost in Space episode and come back around to Star Trek, I think is one of its strengths.
I think this is like the strengths and the weaknesses come out perfectly because I as a kid really thought that he was just a chair floating in space, and I didn't understand it, and it doesn't make sense. And I think there's so many things where it's like you just didn't really think through what was really going on here.
Captain Kirk, I believe. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, sir.
So Lincoln is played by Lee Bergier. So Lee Bergier, okay, before I get into his credits, was actually not the first choice to play Lincoln in this episode. Wait till you hear the first choice to play Lincoln in The Savage Curtain. Ladies and gentlemen, that first choice was none other than, I'm just going to say, the actor from another episode that Johnny Roca helped us with, Mark Leonard.
Oh, wow.
Mark Leonard was the first choice to play Lincoln after playing Sarek and after playing the Romulan commander, but he was already committed to filming in the TV series Here Come the Brides, so he had to pass, but he really, really wanted to do it. So Lee Bergier was seen on TV shows like Perry Mason, Mannix, Mission Impossible, and Dynasty. And back in World War II, he was in charge of entertainment services for soldiers serving in North Africa.
I think he makes this episode.
Mm.
I mean, I'm not saying he's a Daniel Day-Lewis level of Lincoln, but I love him in this episode. And I think this is why the Lincoln became one of my heroes starts with this actor, and the lines that they give him.
What do you think of his performance, John?
I love his performance. There's a real I mean, look, you're coming in, everybody knows, as a guest star, you're coming into a TV series. It's been on for 3 years. It's a well-oiled machine. How are you going to, plus you're portraying an iconic character that, remember, this is 1968, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, like the idea of being aware of people who were for the good of the country was there. And so who were assassinated was in people's minds. So you're taking this on at a really interesting year in the country's history. And I think he brings the right amount of gravitas and deep voice and just almost like a fatherly approach to the character that I think is so perfectly delivered by this actor. Every line he delivers works so well. And you're right. He is the hero of this episode. He makes the episode work.
And there are so many poetic moments, so much great dialogue. And when this actor, Lee Bergier, says these lines, like you just go, God, he was like born to play this guy. He's fantastic.
And the look on Shatner's face is so good. Like you can tell this is something. How can I say this? Not a lot of things shock Kirk at this point. As you said, Scott, near the end of the mission. This gets deep within him. And of course, later, a couple minutes later, we'll hear Spock say that they scanned the ship and clearly figured out the one person that you revere and love and have them appear on the screen. So really interesting decision. So whatever cheesiness may be there, for me, it ends where Kirk reacts to it, because you can tell he's legitimately just in a state of shock, but also like adoration for this image.
I agree. I agree completely. That definitely struck me during my rewatch. John, like when Lincoln addresses him, the look on Kirk's face is not this stern, like, what is this? I got to protect my ship and my crew. Like, he's like, wow.
Yeah.
Lincoln. Like, for Kirk at this stage of this mission to be speechless and to be in awe after everything he has seen and done and everything that has happened to him, speaks just volumes about his admiration for Lincoln and what he wants to believe he is seeing.
Uhura,
No need to check your voice telegraph device. Do I gather that you recognize me?
I recognize what you appear to be.
And appearances can be most deceiving. But not in this case, James Kirk. I am Abraham Lincoln.
Wow. You know what? Like, that could have been just a silly, like, come on. But within just seconds of being like, oh, come on, this is silly, you go, wow, what a great moment. Again, John, the look on Kirk's face is just seals the deal.
Captain, will you permit me to come aboard your vessel? No doubt you have devices which can check my reality.
We'd be honored to have you aboard, Mr. President.
So right from the beginning, Kirk makes the choice to treat this guy as if he's really Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Do you think he's wrong, Steve?
No, I think he is totally right. And I like his reasoning that he gives later on in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just, these are all the things. There's so many little things that don't work and that are like wrong. And this is one of them, which he asks.
Do you still measure time in minutes?
And Kirk, who we've been talking about minutes through the entire series, says,
We can convert to it, sir.
Yeah.
I mean, there are just so many little, like, no, we talked about minutes probably in the last episode. We did,
We
because
talked about minutes in the Corbomite maneuver.
I mean, we talked about minutes throughout the whole series.
Isn't it laying the groundwork, though, that he is stuck in 19th century time and 19th century approach and 19th century ideology? So for him, he is asking Kirk. And so, and I get your point, obviously, but I'm saying maybe he's asking Kirk. This is kind of a way of ingratiating himself even more with the illusion of who he is by asking these questions. So Kirk is like, oh, yeah. Because he even smirks. Kirk even smirks. He goes, well, we can convert to that if you want.
Yeah,
just a little bit of an understanding here. So I wonder if it's a little bit of they were trying to just make it seem as if this guy was stuck in the time that he was creating.
That's the thing. I have no problem with him asking the question. The problem I have with is the answer should be yes. We still measure time in minutes.
Security, send a detachment to the transporter room immediately, face his side arms, and be prepared to give presidential honors.
Jim, do you really believe he's Abraham Lincoln?
Well, it's obvious he believes it.
I got to say this about Shatner's performance in this episode. So the last episode we covered on Enterprise Incidents was one of my least favorite episodes of the entire series, Requiem for Methuselah. And one of the big complaints about that episode is how not only how out of character Kirk is, at least we thought, some people disagree with us, but also how off Shatner's performance was. I felt like, the series is ending. They're not getting picked up. Morale's low. He just kind of was phoning it in. Not in this episode. I feel like Shatner's performance really rebounded and felt like the Kirk that we know, the Kirk that we have admired, the Kirk that goes back to the beginning of the first season, or especially when Gene took over in the middle of the first season. So I think Shatner's awesome in this episode.
We come back to the transporter room, and there is Scotty in his kilt and McCoy in his dress uniform, and basically Scotty thinks this whole thing is ridiculous.
He is very Scottish in this episode. He's full on with the kilt. Later he mentions haggis. He talks about all these things. Very Scottish in this episode, but he is in essence like taking an element of the Bones part in this episode, constantly questioning it, constantly pushing back. He's like, well, why would Kirk believe this? It doesn't make any sense. So you can tell that they were trying to give their other characters some more life as they were ending the show here.
President Lincoln, indeed. No doubt to be followed by Louis of France and Robert the Bruce.
If so, we'll execute appropriate honors to each, Mr. Scott.
Robert the Bruce. There's another, which I didn't know who Robert the Bruce was till I saw Braveheart. So that name went right by me when I watched.
Me neither. And that watching it this time, it never jumped out. Like now it jumped out of me. It's like, oh, I know who that guy is. Yeah.
yeah, totally.
I also think there's a lot of padding in this episode. I think they just, there's a lot of like, let's just fill out these scenes a little bit more.
I don't for a moment believe that President Lincoln is actually coming aboard, but we're dealing with an unknown and apparently highly advanced life form. Until we know, when in Rome, we'll do as the Romans do.
I feel like this goes back to the Kirk that we first saw in the Corbomite maneuver,
Yeah.
where he's like, this is probably a threat, but of course, in the Corbomite maneuver, it was a threat. But he's like, this is a new life form. This is why we are here. That's why we're aboard her.
So, and then we hear as we got the coordinates and we're about to beam something up that at first,
For a moment, it appeared almost mineral, like living rock with heavy foreclaws. Settling down now to completely human readings.
And Scotty says, we can beam it aboard.
and this is one of the things that again, a little more thought might have figured some of this stuff out is, so what just happened on the planet? They saw something that looked mineral with heavy foreclaws. And
so
then
clearly this rock creature created a rock version of Lincoln, put it together, and that's what they transported aboard.
Well, okay, go ahead.
But wait a minute. But when McCoy is talking to Scotty about it in just a few moments, he said it could have been something that was standing by. So, John, I thought that what they picked up was Yarnik. What they picked up was the rock creature.
Oh,
you know what I mean? Because like Scotty says, I don't know. It could have been something that was standing close by. Which that's the creature that we see. Eventually. Yeah, but you could absolutely could be right too that it was a rock creature like Yarnik that morphed into a human form of Lincoln.
Yeah, I've always believed that they were all rock creatures, just like he was, and he just uses, or maybe they're molten lava because they say minerals. So for me, I think of whatever's on the planet that he can put, or I don't know the sex of that, put it together and transport it up. You know, what I've always thought is that it was the Vulcan guy standing next to Kirk. He'd already prepared the Vulcan guy. So they saw the Vulcan guy, but they transported up Kirk. Like they caught the Vulcan guy on there. But yeah, the creature makes more sense, of course. Yeah.
This is what I mean is that I don't think this makes sense because it's like, well, it's a big difference if this is one of the citizens of this planet has transformed into Lincoln.
Oh yeah,
to do this thing,
right?
Or if Lincoln was just created and never existed in any moments before, that's really different. And so, who this Lincoln guy actually is, I don't think they really figure it out.
It's a great point because we get told that there are people watching and there's a TV and citizens of the planet, but we never see this. We never see it. So all we have is an unreliable narrator like this person to tell us, or this creature rather, to tell us what's happening, but we don't actually see it.
Maybe the ambiguity of it is what gives it sort of a chilling factor that like we don't know, we never actually find out, and that's okay.
The mystery of it, yeah.
We get our honors ready, we cue the music, and we beam aboard Abraham Lincoln.
Again, this could have been totally cheesy and silly, but as soon as Lee Bergier steps off the platform as Lincoln and he starts talking, addressing Kirk and the music and all that, you go, I'm in. I buy it. I'm in.
Strange. Where are the musicians?
That's taped music, sir.
And it's interesting. So he has been programmed, or he knows a whole bunch of stuff about the ship.
Yeah.
And about the crew, but he doesn't know everything because he doesn't understand about tape music. He's still a 19th century person.
Gentlemen, if those are weapons, please lower them. At my age, I'm afraid I'm not very dangerous.
But I just like how disarming, like his delivery of the dialogue. He's just like, clearly this is not Lincoln. Like there's no way this could be Lincoln. And it's coming from a planet that just moments ago was like totally covered with lava. And there's something aboard the Enterprise in the 23rd century. And his delivery just makes you go, yep, that's Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love him. And what's so funny is now, and I know, John, I know Lincoln's a hero of yours. I think you said at one point that you have Team of Rivals sitting by your bed everywhere you go.
Yeah, the Doris Kearns Goodwin book, yeah.
And he's my hero too. Mm. I didn't know anything about Lincoln when I first saw this episode. They did a great job of capturing that gentle strength and kindness, which is what made him such a profound figure,
Yeah, I can't remember a time watching this episode where I didn't know who Lincoln was before I watched the episode. So I feel like I might have been taught Lincoln in first or second grade. And then just because I was an avid reader, like I started reading before I was in first grade. Like I was reading books.
Wow.
I just, for whatever reason, I just was one of those people that I could start reading quicker. And so I was always consumed with that. And so I might have learned about this, or they might have taught me this. So when he shows up in the episode, I remember as a kid being like, "Whoa," so he nailed it. And so, yeah, you're right, Steve. It's just like the way he handles himself, and the whole thing is like how you would think Lincoln would, or how you were taught to believe Lincoln acted and what have you, which is what I love that later on in the episode, Lincoln has a conversation with Kirk about that. I know what you've been told I am, but I can be quite evil or I can be quite hard when I need to be. And I love that.
Lee Bergera's performance is so effective and so right on point. Steve, I was like you, and just like you too, John. My entry point to Lincoln was The Savage Kurt. My entry point to Lincoln was Star Trek. And here's this actor I'm watching as Lincoln for the first time, and all of the nuances and the delivery and the gentleness and the strength that Lee Bergera inflects into his performance. Everything I learned about Lincoln later tied back into what I learned about Lincoln while watching Star Trek.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Gentlemen, I hope to talk to each of you. But meanwhile, your captain is consumed with questions, and I shall do my utmost to answer them. And I trust your duties will permit time to answer some of mine.
Again, that's like a lovely way to speak.
Yeah.
And they head out, and it's Scotty alone with McCoy, who asks again about what was there before they beamed him aboard.
You heard Mr. Spock yourself. Mineral, he called it. Like living rock.
And that became Lincoln.
I couldn't tell. May have been another figure down there standing by.
And I love that they switched this because in terms of the construction of the episode, right? It's Kirk and Spock would normally be the skeptical ones in this situation, but you've got to fill that void because they're both kind of caught up with this whole Lincoln thing. So having Scotty and McCoy be the skeptical ones, I think works to keep the balance that you've established for 3 seasons on the ship.
I cannot conceive it possible that Abraham Lincoln could have actually been reincarnated, and yet his kindness, his gentle wisdom, his humor, everything about him is so right.
We see Kirk on the bridge in his dress uniform, standing next to Lincoln.
Yeah.
And the pose that Kirk is taking next to his hero. And I got to tell you, watching just that split moment where you see the B-roll shot of Kirk and Lincoln side by side, they belong next to each other.
Sure. I look, Kirk's one of my Lincoln is one of my real life heroes.
Yeah.
Kirk's one of my fictitious heroes, you know?
Wait, fictitious? What are you talking about?
What are you talking about? I mean, Steve, what?
But after some discussion of the specs of the Enterprise and how high we are orbiting, up walks Lieutenant Uhura, and this is a moment we're going to have to discuss.
Yes, we are.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Scott,
What a charming negress. Oh, forgive me, my dear. I know that in my time some use that term as a description of property.
but why should I object to that term, sir? You see, in our century, we've learned not to fear words.
So I think there is a lot here. This was a profound moment to me when I was younger. I think the world has changed in ways that maybe this doesn't reflect the way that we think in some ways today. And I think this is a fascinating moment.
All right. I have a lot to say about this too. But John, I want to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, yeah, it certainly was uncomfortable. I don't remember this moment growing up as a kid, which probably just is, I just didn't think twice about it because I didn't understand that whole thing. Or maybe in my mind, I defaulted that this was a term that was used in the 1800s or whatever when Lincoln was around. Watching it this time, certainly I was much more aware of it, much more uncomfortable with it. But Uhura's response really surprised me. And that was an interesting moment, considering what's going on in our world nowadays and what we've got in terms of conversations, in terms of anger, in terms of constructive conversations, this idea of, well, that's quite all right. Words, we're trained for words not to hurt us anymore. We've embraced who we are and what have you. And so he steps back, just like you said earlier with the weapons thing. He's very much like, well, then I apologize where no offense was intended. But he does criticize the backwards thinking of his time. So although it is a moment where it is uncomfortable, it is a moment to overall say how Roddenberry, in maybe a clumsy way, is visualizing the future as a much more accepting and understanding future, an equal future for people of color and people of whatever sexual identity you are.
So first of all, that's beautifully said, John, and I agree completely. I have always
that's beautifully said, and you're horribly wrong. You're absolutely wrong on this.
Again, I had not seen this episode in a long time.
Yeah.
And when Lincoln says those words, I went, "Oh, ouch!" But it was Uhura's response and Kirk's reaction to Uhura's response that basically put all of what Star Trek is all about into one moment.
Yeah.
Because Uhura's response was, no offense taken at all. We don't let words hurt us anymore. And then Kirk is looking at Uhura with a smile, with such idealistic pride that, yep, we have learned to embrace who we are. And this moment just really affected me emotionally. I just went, like, this is what Star Trek is all about. You know, there was at the end of the first season of Discovery, Michael Burnham gives this whole speech about this is Starfleet. And that's a great speech, but this moment right now, this exchange between Uhura and Kirk and Lincoln, this is Star Trek. That we have we don't let words hurt us. We've learned to embrace who we are. It is an idealism that was certainly necessary in 1969 when the episode aired. It is an idealism that we sorely need now, and something that we really need to listen to Uhura's response and go, yeah, right, words should not hurt us. And the beauty of all this, fellas, is this. This is the last time we see Uhura in the original series.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
She is not in the next 2 episodes at all.
What?
And yes, this is the last time we see her until Star Trek The Motion. Well, I mean, we see her and certainly hear her in the animated series.
Yeah, yeah.
For this character, for Uhura, for her presence on the bridge to be such a landmark moment when the series first premiered, and for her to complete her arc as a character by telling Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves, that we do not let words hurt us anymore. I just think that is such a way for her character to stick the landing and to go out on the highest note possible. It is a beautiful moment, and I just thought it was. I got really emotional watching it.
And I think of Dave Filoni. You know, Dave Filoni writes Ahsoka Tano. He created Ahsoka Tano. That is an important character for him, live action or animated. He is responsible. He wants to put the words in her mouth to create this character and deepen this character. And Roddenberry, of course, had a relationship with Nichelle Nichols and certainly created Uhura. So I'm sure he felt a responsibility here to come back and write this episode to make sure she had the right send-off. And like you said, stick the landing, Scott. I would not be surprised if he was like, I'm writing this episode. That's that.
Oh my gosh, you're absolutely right.
So I think there's a ton here. I have always remembered this moment. Always. Like, it made a strong impression on me as a kid. And I think it is kind of amazing that here we have Uhura, who Martin Luther King Jr. convinced to stay on the show.
Good point.
Who was assassinated 6 months before this.
Yeah.
And now we have Uhura meeting Abraham Lincoln. Just that alone, without the dialogue, is kind of an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And then this philosophy that gets put forth is very much the philosophy I was raised with is that you don't let the words hurt you. And I was just listening to, on Sam Harris's podcast, Neil deGrasse Tyson was on, who I love, and they were talking about the racism that he experienced coming up. And he was a kid who wanted to be a physicist, and that was not something that an African-American kid in the 60s should be doing. And he came up against a lot of stuff. And this is the thing he said, and I want to bring it up, which is he said, when I was raised with sticks and stones will break my bones, but names can never hurt me. And what he said on the podcast is that philosophy has changed. And that today there are many, many people saying, don't say these words around me, whatever they are, you know, that they're triggering or they are painful. And that here we have this moment on Star Trek, which is kind of saying the opposite, saying, why would words hurt me? And the other thing that I think is amazing about this moment is that Abraham Lincoln, who obviously you would think we would go like should be above reproach, catches himself.
Mm-hmm.
The word comes out of his mouth, and that it's obvious that he regrets it, worries that he would be offending, and then wants to, apologize for it.
Yeah.
And that it's not the word, it's the fact that Lincoln sees it, understands it, and means no offense is also part of what goes on in this moment,
Yeah.
And so I feel like this is a discussion we still need to be having today,
For sure. Absolutely agree.
And Kirk's line is also great. He says,
We've each learned to be delighted with what we are.
Boom.
Yeah.
that's a lot of what Star Trek means to a lot of people.
Yep.
For sure.
And then Spock kind of mentions this. The Vulcans had a similar philosophy, and Lincoln says,
Philosophy of Nome, meaning all. How did I know that? Just as I seem to know that on the planet's surface, you will meet one of the greatest living Vulcans in all the long history of your planet.
First thing I wrote down is, he's not one of the greatest living Vulcans. He died a long time ago, though I guess he's living again now.
Yeah.
And I also do love the moment that as Lincoln's asking for more questions, he asks about the engine, and Kirk says,
Certainly. Our engineering officers.
Has been waiting in the briefing room for you, sir, for over 2 hours.
Her timing is great. Her timing is really great.
So Kirk has been so into hanging out with Abraham Lincoln that he has totally forgot what he was supposed to be doing.
Jim, I would be the last to advise you on your command image.
I got that, Bones, but continue.
Do I have to lay it out for you? Practically, the entire crew's seen you treat this imposter like the real thing when he can't possibly be the real article.
Here's what I want to ask, and feel free to jump in with the answer, whoever comes with it first. Mm-hmm. What does this scene remind you of?
The menagerie, maybe? No.
I'm going to say Return to Tomorrow, Risk is Our Business.
Oh, absolutely. I thought, yes, totally, 100%. I thought you meant with McCoy saying you're looking bad in front of the crew.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's what this is.
Yes. And I mean, sure. Is it a rehash of that, where the rest of the episode is a rehash of other things that I mentioned at the top of the conversation? Yes, but I don't care. I still like it.
I mean, I kind of feel, I do feel it as a rehash, and one that is like, a kind of a pale imitation of that other scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why Lincoln, Spock? Any speculation on that?
Speculation is unnecessary, Captain. The answer is clear. President Lincoln has always been a very personal hero to you. What better way to titillate your curiosity than to make him come alive for you?
Mm-hmm. Wow, good dialogue.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, can you imagine if someone made your personal hero come alive and you could hang out with them for a while?
I could hang out with Captain Kirk for real. Sure.
I was thinking to myself, who would show? Because I mean, like, he didn't pick it. It was like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. He didn't pick it. It was picked for him. So, you know what I'm saying? So I wonder, who would it be if they scanned my mind and my body? Who would actually show up there to be the hero that I would talk to? So I wish you could create a VR thing like that would be able to scan your body. Of course, the privacy issues would go off the roof, but like, it could be interesting to see who would pop up. And then you'd have to really reckon with that. Like, wow, I do feel that way about this person. Could be an interesting experience if you were able to make that happen.
Well,
you mean like you want?
Next time someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
Yes, right.
Well, it also could be scary because you could end up in the astral plane and run into Killmonger.
Whoa.
And so, and yes, they're arguing with him. I literally, as they're telling to convince him not to go down to the planet, I literally did write down, Scott, risk is our business.
Yep.
And we're in the transporter room. We're locked in a synchronous orbit. Lincoln's there, and they beam him down, and their tricorders and weapons stay behind.
That's a great moment to walk, because they walk
right.
up and they look at each other. It's framed well by the director there, because you want to feel that sense of impending doom about the whole situation. It's smart.
Some of the earlier versions of the story, John, you mentioned something before about how, there are beings on this planet who are watching.
Yeah.
Who are going to watch the events unfold. In earlier versions of the story, that was a much more prominent backstory, because you only hear Yarnik say it once, like people all over the planet are watching.
Right.
But what it was supposed to be was an almost bread and circuses take on television, a satire on television. But yeah,
yes.
that was downplayed by Freiberger when he was, doing his rewrites with Arthur Singer, and and also because they already went there on Bread and Circuses, but also when they first beamed down to the planet, the people that they see on the planet. So the Vulcan was not named Sorak, the Vulcan was named Levak, and there was also a flower child messiah named Pan on the planet.
Okay.
Just to date it, just to make it really dated.
Yeah, thank God they didn't go there because they already did all that with The Way to Eden.
Oh, yeah, right.
So we're down on the planet. By the way, for a planet that no human has ever been on, there are a lot of footprints around everywhere. And it takes them a second, but they notice that they don't have their phasers and tricorders. The communications don't work. Up on the Enterprise, they're trying to call down to Kirk, and their communications don't work. And then the lights go dim on the Enterprise, and Kirk has now had just about enough.
The game is over. We've treated you with courtesy. We've gone along with what and who you think you are.
This is another reason why I think that Shatner's performance really did rebound from the previous episode, because Kirk is right on point. Yeah. He was, giving into his idol, his hero, wanting to believe in at least the image of it all. But now, you know what? All bets are off. Okay, we played your game. Enough's enough already. What are you doing? What's up with my ship? He's being absolutely the captain that we've seen since day one. Absolutely the captain who told Zefram Cochrane, I already don't like it in Metamorphosis, like he's had enough. And this is Captain Kirk.
Mm-hmm. Dumb joke coming. You want to know why Captain Kirk is different from how he was in the last episode?
Why?
Because Spock made him forget.
Oh, not a dumb joke. Not a dumb joke at all. Steve, that's very, very valid.
Okay. Because he forgot his love for Reyna.
Yeah.
He's actually kind of reset.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
He rebooted Captain Kirk.
Despite the seeming contradictions, all is as it appears to be. I am Abraham Lincoln.
Just as I am whom I appear to be.
And there is a Vulcan.
Sorak, played by Barry Atwater, who was seen on TV shows like, first of all, he was on the TV show One Step Beyond, which was kind of like The Twilight Zone. That was an anthology series in the early 60s. And he played Abraham Lincoln.
Oh.
He was also on TV shows like Wagon Train, Perry Mason, The Twilight Zone, Mission Impossible, and famously, he played the vampire villain in the TV movie version of Kolchak's The Night Stalker.
Oh, yeah.
Now, here's my question, John, starting with you. What do you think of Barry Atwater's performance playing a Vulcan?
Well, I think it's really interesting, especially because when you say he's the father of Vulcan, and he comes across almost larger than life, like physically bigger than everybody, which I think is a really smart choice to choose someone who conveys that. Lincoln was already tall, so it's already factored in, but this is a new person we don't know, and having this person step out and have the size, and even given more size with those long, the design of his costume there to give him longer shoulders, it conveys a sense of like almost stone strength. Do you know what I'm saying? So I loved this version. Obviously I enjoy Spock and Mark Leonard playing the kid. Yeah. So it was having him come in as a new kind of Vulcan. I really enjoyed it. And it makes sense. He looks like the father of what Vulcan came to be. So, yeah.
Steve, what do you think of his performance?
I think he's great. And I think it solidifies more Vulcan culture for me. I really like him. We're back up on the Enterprise where Sulu is in the captain's chair, and it seems like all hell is breaking loose. Scotty shows up. The engines won't restart. There's all sorts of, loss of power in the warp engines. Seems like things are really bad there.
Live long and prosper, Spock.
And Spock does not return the Vulcan salute. He says,
"It is not logical that you are Sorak."
And I love Sorak's response.
Whatever I am, would it harm you to give response?
And Spock's response is logical.
Live long and prosper. Image of Sorak.
By the way, just so you know, my autocorrect changes Sorak to Barack.
Oh, wow. Well, that's fitting.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
And then there's this little discussion of whether or not Spock displayed some emotion on seeing Serac. And I like that Serac, with a bit of arrogance, I think, says,
"The cause was more than sufficient."
I think he's really good. I mean, Spock, of course, was set, or at least Nimoy's performance as Spock set the precedent for every single actor to portray a Vulcan to follow. Some fared better than others, but Mark Leonard was right there, and I think Barry Atwater's performance as Serac is overlooked in the great Vulcan performances, because I thought, especially with that little, sarcasm that he inflects in there, Steve, that he was terrific.
After the next lines, I wrote down, "I'm liking this episode." And here's what the lines are.
"In my time, we knew not of Earthmen. I am pleased to see that we have differences. May we together become greater than the sum of both of us."
That is a great line.
Well, what I love about it is what you would expect. The normal line was like, "Hey, I've never met this group of people. It seems we're a lot alike." Like you comment when you want to bring people together, you tend to comment on your similarities. And Serac comments on the differences and then says, "May we together become greater than the sum of both of us." If that's not Star Trek philosophy, I don't know what is.
Again, and this is right after Uhura's exchange with Lincoln on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
I mean, this is I think Savage Curtain is a special episode. We're not even at the end of the second act, and we're getting all these inspiring, idealistic moments that would be really relevant and certainly inspiring today.
Well, the fact is, when you said that Roddenberry wrote the first 2 acts, but not the second 2 acts, I think there's something to that.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing what happened. And at this moment, we get a giant molten rock creature.
The rock creature. So we see this transformation, these visual effects, which are still pretty good by today's standards. A rock transforms into a life form that we've never seen before on Star Trek. So we learned that we are on the planet Excalibur, and this is Yarnek. Yarnek is the name of this creature. So the person inside the Yarnek costume was Janos Prokaxa, and this person played the Horta.
I was going to say, yeah.
Neville in the Dark and the Mugatu in A Private Little War. The voice of the Mugatu, even though it is altered, the voice's name you will know because Bart LaRue, among other things, was the voice of the Guardian of Forever in The City on the Edge of Forever.
And here come 4 people who are introduced as Genghis Khan, Colonel Green, who led a genocidal war early in the 21st century, Zora, who experimented with body chemistries of subject tribes in my hometown of Tiburon, and Kahless, the unforgettable, the Klingon who set the pattern for his planet.
So these 4 actors, Colonel Green is played by Philip Pine, who was on TV shows like The Adventures of Superman, The Untouchables, The Twilight Zone, The Fugitive, and The Streets of San Francisco. Kahless is played by Robert Huron, who played Sam, the crewman that Charlie X made disappear in the gym.
Oh.
Yeah, he was that guy. He was that guy. But he was also on TV shows like I Spy, Wild Wild West, and Dallas. And he was also a stuntman in well, check this out, a very storied and experienced stuntman over the years in films like Girl Happy with Elvis, Diamonds Are Forever with James Bond, Soylent Green, Blazing Saddles, Rocky, and The Black Hole. Then there's Zora, played by Carol Daniels, who was a stunt woman, and she was in films like Spartacus, The Graduate, and one of my favorite movies that's really underrated, Capricorn 1.
Oh, yeah.
And then, yeah, I love that movie. Genghis Khan is played by Nathan Jung, who was on TV shows like Kung Fu, Starsky and Hutch, and The Amazing Spider-Man, the 1970s version of that hero, and also in films like Big Trouble in Little China and Black Rain. And just as an aside, fellas, in the earlier versions of this story, there were 2 other villains that were supposed to be on the planet. One of them was Attila the Hun. Can you guess who the other villain who was supposed to be on the planet, but the producers wisely took this person out? Can you guess who it is, Steve?
Is Hitler?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. It is Hitler. It is. Wow. it is Hitler, and it was like, I mean, you're talking like
That's another episode. That's a whole other episode.
totally. You're talking like 25 years after World War II, and they thought, maybe we take let's take Hitler out of this.
So there's a bunch of weird stuff about this. The first small one, not a weird one, is that in my brain as a kid, I always thought that Zora was some sort of crazy mutant Vulcan. Like she had done experiments on herself, because she has kind of pointed eyebrows, and she's a crazy character. I wish we got more of Genghis Khan because they don't really do much with him. I won't comment on the politics of the makeup on Kahless, but this is definitely where, like, look, if you want an actor with dark skin, why don't you just get an actor with dark skin instead of painting someone dark?
Oh yeah, but yeah, fair point. Yeah.
And the other thing, which I never knew until this rewatch, is like, oh, this is where Kahless comes from, that we actually becomes a part of Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. Like this is the first version we see of Kahless.
Yeah, so Kahless, it was such a forgettable character in the Savage Curtain, but I think it was the 6th season of Star Trek The Next Generation. He was in an episode called Rightful Heir, where Kahless returns, and of course now he looks like a Klingon, and what the way Klingons look in the 24th century. And Steve, remember when we did our deep dive on the episode The Deadly Years? We were joined by a guest named Jim Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Brooks wrote Rightful Heir. So it was his idea to take the Kahless character and open him up in Star Trek The Next Generation.
Oh, how cool.
We ask you to observe with us the confrontation of the two opposing philosophies you term good and evil. Since this is our first experiment with Earthlings, our theme is a simple one: survival.
This is what the plot is going to be. They are going to have good battle evil to see which one is stronger.
What do you mean, survival?
The word is explicit. If you and Spock survive, you return to your vessel. If you do not...
And there's a big music sting, and we hear...
Your existence is ended.
And the look on Kirk's face, it's very subtle, but the impact of it after being like on the highest of highs and talking to his hero, now is like, okay, this got real.
So I think it's very interesting that Roddenberry left after writing Acts 1 and 2 and didn't go on to Act 3, because one of the weird things about this episode is like the idea, okay, we're going to have good battle evil to see which is stronger. Well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. First of all, good and evil are not philosophies. It's like, it's not like even if they had Hitler on the show, Hitler wasn't going like, I believe in evil and doing evil. That is not how. He was evil. I think we can agree on this show that he was. But like, those aren't philosophies. So how can they represent themselves? And then that task of like showing that in Acts 3 and 4 is really hard. And I don't think they succeed in doing it. But we're back in Act 3. We're on the bridge, and we find out they don't have the power to bring up, to beam up Kirk and Spock. And they talk a little bit about, the illusions of these other life forms. And I feel like, again, this is all kind of padding.
Yeah, I agree.
Back on the planet, and Yarnak's like, okay, why are you guys hesitating? Go ahead.
What are you standing around for?
Spock and I refuse to participate.
You will decide otherwise.
But they're also told to make weapons out of what is around you. Now, what does that sound like?
Arena.
That's totally Arena.
And it doesn't, their choice of weapons doesn't have anything to do with good or evil. You know what I mean? Your ability to make a spear has nothing to do. Now, it seems obvious maybe the creatures on this planet don't know what good and evil mean at all.
Like, what if Gene Kuhn actually wrote this episode? He wrote Arena, and just like in Arena, the victor in the Savage Curtain, they're the victor. The other guys, they don't have starships or anything. Yeah. But if Kirk wins, the ship survives. If Kirk loses, the ship is destroyed. That was an outcome of Arena, possibly.
Yep. Well, but the difference with Arena is that in Arena, Kirk has an emotional, personal journey to go on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and here he does not.
Right. Right.
It was about the character learning a lesson and making choices. That's not what this is about.
Right. There's no moment where, Kirk has this epiphany of, no, I won't kill you.
Yeah.
Nope.
That's what's missing.
Captain Kirk, I quite agree with your attitude toward this charade. It's ridiculous to think that we should take part in it.
What do you want?
Well, the same thing as you do, to get out of here. I have no quarrel with you any more than you have with me.
And he, in a very reasonable way, talks about, hey, we got to work together and that they're really the enemy.
You're somewhat different than the way history paints you, Colonel Green.
History tends to exaggerate.
And I'm like, we already established that the reason that Lincoln is exactly how Kirk imagined him is that he was literally built out of his imagination. So it doesn't make a lot of sense that Green is not how he imagines him, since he would be built out of the same place.
Wait, is that established? I don't recall that being established where Green was created out of Kirk's mind.
Or where did Zora and where did Genghis Khan and Kahless come from?
Where else would they have gotten them?
Well, that's a good point.
That's the thing in my head. I'm like, no, actually, that is right because he is tricking him.
That's true.
It is absolutely like Green would be in Kirk's mind. If they are taken out of Kirk's mind, it does fit because he is tricking Kirk. It's Kirk who, once again, gets caught with his pants down. So you keep quoting regulation. Once again.
In fact, yeah, you're right, because that is exactly what is happening. Because he's proposing that they combine their forces and come up with some way to overcome it, Kirk does say,
You were notorious, Colonel Green, for striking at your enemies in the midst of negotiating with them.
Yeah, see? So he's like,
At which point, we see the other three bad guys who are totally just standing there, completely visible, split up and circle around the back. It's just like everyone would see them. This is not like it's not possible that they can sneak up in this way.
Right.
And then Genghis Khan attacks, and it's just all so bad, which is he has a big rock, or quote unquote rock, which he throws at Spock, which clearly he misses him.
Yeah.
And then the stuntman kind of bends over almost like he's trying to catch the rock to make it look like it hits him. Yeah. And then even though he doesn't touch the rock, he falls down. That's like just all bad.
Choreography is not that great.
Yeah. Let me show you some pro wrestling moves, Steve. It's the same thing. But I agree with you. The choreography is not great here.
Well, speaking of pro wrestling, Lincoln gets a couple throws in there.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, all this is going on. Why isn't Spock using the FSNP, the famous Spock neck pinch, on anybody? I'd be like taking that out like, you're going down, and you're going down, and you're going down.
So the bad guys run off. Kirk says, anybody hurt?
I feel my clothing is somewhat damaged. But how delightful to discover at my age that I can still wrestle.
Which is cute. And then Kirk walks up in the midst of this and touches the burning rock creature and burns his hand. I'm like, that's really dumb.
But that's, but I don't know if that's out of the realm of possibility for Kirk, because he's got to figure out what this creature is. He doesn't have the tricorder. He doesn't have anyone from the ship that can like scan the planet or scan this creature. So he defaults to a rudimentary tactic, which is to try to touch him or try to see if he can punch him, or, because Kirk is a physical guy at times. So he resorts to that. And now he sees from the burn, like, okay, I get it. Like, this is something I can't do because this guy's probably made of molten lava.
I don't know. Whenever I've been around giant things of molten lava, I can usually feel that they're hot from a good distance away.
Probably, yes.
Kirk definitely did not think that through.
Yeah. And then he lets him communicate with the ship. And we call up to the ship where we find out that not only is the ship in trouble, but it's going to blow up in 4 hours.
Yeah.
So now you're using an element that goes back to the Apple, where there's a time limit on this, that they have 4 hours before the Enterprise explodes.
It's a weird, you're right. It's a weird greatest hits.
Yeah. Like, what can we take from this episode? And, but I still
it almost feels like Gene had been reading the other scripts. It kind of came in. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that, and then that, and then that. Yeah.
Well, and there is this moment where again we hear Kirk say,
"Scotty, inform Starfleet Command. Disengage nacelles, jettison if possible."
Also an Apple moment,
and also this idea that we see later on in Next Generation of like this ship actually could split apart. And just in the middle of him giving instructions, communication is cut off, And then we have the bad guys talking. It ends up that Kahless has been spying on them and seeing that the good guys have done nothing. And he wants to attack now. And Green, who clearly is the leader.
I want to make sure the odds are in our favor. Overwhelm and devastate. That's the way to get power and to hold it. And I mean to do that.
And he, finds a place that they'll use as a base because it's defensible.
Are we fighting a defensive war, James?
No, we don't have time. But if things do go against us, I want a place to retreat to. What I want to do now is scout them out, find their weaknesses, and attack.
And I know that you love this upcoming moment, John. I am 100% certain that you like what's about to happen.
You drink whiskey?
Occasionally, why?
Because you have qualities very much like those of another man I admired greatly.
And Kirk immediately just kind of gives a little thank you. And then as he's saying thank you, Lincoln says,
General Grant.
Thank you.
And the Kirk reaction to that is so great.
Thank you.
Screw you for knowing me so well. Yeah, I did absolutely just had a big stupid grin on my face because getting that kind of validation from a hero of yours and then having the veil of Kirk drop for a minute and you see not Captain Kirk, but James Kirk, Jimmy Kirk, little James Kirk, who gets love from the president in that way, President Lincoln in that way.
Wow,
Great.
that's nice. Yeah, yeah.
And I like how he says, James, are we going? So he, slowly but surely, he becomes almost like a father figure to Kirk in this episode.
For sure. For sure.
I think that, so it's so funny because there's all sorts of things that I think are wrong with this episode. But the Kirk-Lincoln relationship is not one of them.
Yeah,
no. And I actually think that Kirk, which I don't believe that he does maybe any other time in the history of Star Trek, cedes leadership to some degree to Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, because Abe doesn't take it. Abe says, I don't mean to step on your feet, James, but I think this and this and this. And so he's very respectful. And of course, because Kirk has such love for him, even though Lincoln was not a military leader, Grant was the one who did all the military leading, but he has such respect for him that he's like, well, okay, maybe I can listen to some logic here from you. Yeah.
Well, and it's so funny because the book Team of Rivals, which we were talking about earlier, that hadn't been written yet.
Right.
But this is Lincoln's style. Lincoln was never confrontational. He was always kind of collaborative and kind and knew how to bring people into his realm,
Captain, logic dictates that we consider another course.
In my time on Vulcan, we also faced these same alternatives.
And he tells this story of suing for peace and sending out people asking for peace and that they were killed and the next were killed. And ultimately, peace was achieved.
Yeah.
And Kirk says, which is true, these circumstances are different,
Yeah.
These are people who were picked for being horrible, evil people. They're not just like an army on another side. And B, you got 4 hours and the ship is going to blow up. But Serac wants to sue for peace.
So much of what we heard Spock say about Vulcan history in Balance of Terror and Let That Be Our Last Battlefield, we are now seeing come to fruition in Sorac's physical presence, but also his motivation to keep the peace and settle this peacefully. You only hear about Vulcan prehistory in Balance of Terror briefly in the briefing room scene, and then you hear him say more about it while they're having drinks with Beale and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, and you certainly hear about pre-Sorak history in the very next episode, All Our Yesterdays, which is an episode I love. But I've there's actually a chronology here. There's actually a through line between what you heard Spock say about Vulcan history and how you're seeing that history play out in Sorak's appearance in the Savage Curtain.
And the other thing I think he says that's interesting is he says,
if I fail, you lose nothing. After all, I'm no warrior.
I'm not going to be any help.
Yeah.
The captain knows that I have fought at his side before, and will do so now if need be. However, I too am a Vulcan, bred to peace.
I think that the side of Vulcan culture that is bred to peace has, in a lot of ways, kind of been lost in later Star Trek. I don't think we see the logic side and the cold side, a lot. But I don't think we hear about the bred to peace side that much.
Well, because most of the Star Trek stuff we get now is before, right? Most of them is set before.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Or what?
before the original series in terms of the timeline.
Right.
Yeah, but
That's right.
Surak's like 1,000 years before that.
Yeah.
I don't know. When is, yeah, I guess so. I mean, Strange New Worlds, we don't really see that much of it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Strange New Worlds and Discovery take place before the original series, and of course, Star Trek Enterprise takes place 100 years before the original series. But I agree with Steve's point is that you see and hear more about history of the transition and the peaceful side of Vulcans than you do in the later shows, even if they take place before the original series, where you just see like they're Vulcan and that's it, and they're logical and that's it.
I think it's, to be honest with you, just like this show, it's a TV show. And so it has to be created to make ratings, to get ratings. And I think nowadays people don't want to see that. People want more gray areas. People want more portrayals that explore what the actual reality of that is. And you can't just always be peaceful. And certainly even in this episode where you see what happens to him, and we see that, Lincoln himself is like, we're going to get on down. We're going to fight at their level and get dirty, and so he's not saying when they go low, we go high. He's saying we're going to get on down low with them and finish this off, because Lincoln did a lot of, uncomfortable stuff to end this war. If you do your research on Lincoln and some of the tricks that he pulled, suspending habeas corpus, he had some of his political rivals jailed. He got rid of some reporters who were spreading misinformation about the Civil War. This is all sound familiar. So there was things that he was doing that kind of get brushed aside when people have the glorified version of Lincoln.
Yeah.
So, but Steve, you make a great point here that's kind of been lost. But I think the reason it's been lost is because Kurtzman and all these other creators of modern Trek, and this is not a criticism, just an observation, I think they feel that the public doesn't want characters that are what they might deem to be milquetoast and just all about peace. But there is a great amount of conflict that could be mined from that.
Yes.
If you were able to find a way to make it work organically in the storylines that you've created. So your criticism is valid, but as I think about it and speak about it, it could be a real challenge for writers to make that work in modern Trek. Yeah.
Well, but you really just made the point I was about to make, which I'm glad of. But like Spock being the one pushing back on Kirk is part of what makes Star Trek great.
You're right.
It adds conflict. It doesn't take away conflict, and it's not like you can't still have great action and great. It's asking the question, like, is this the only way to do it? And that's sort of what Surak says. At this moment, they talk about, you saw how treacherously the bad guys acted, and he says yes.
But perhaps it's our belief in peace that is actually being tested.
Which I think is a great philosophical concept for him to bring up here. As I said, some of the criticisms for this episode have been like, oh, it's just good versus evil, and it's a very pedantic approach to this concept. Like, not at all. The fact that he is the one saying, I get it. I get what you're talking about, but maybe we're being tested about our resolve. And remember, this is 1968, right? After Martin Luther King was killed, there were riots in the street of people angry at the death of him being killed by a white man, and all of this. There was, very valid, the anger that was being expressed. We were seeing that. So in 1968, this idea of how much are we really committed to peace, right? The flower power stuff was starting to die. We were about to enter in a phase when some of these hippies and activists became people who were doing bombs and grenades and causing violence against the Nixon side of things. And so this was a transition. So him dropping this concept just casually, and remember, this also, like I said, 1960, Martin Luther King spoke about peace, spoke about nonviolence. So having him kind of bring that up, I think, is a really fun moment a really good moment, rather, in the episode to consider and think about philosophically as this is happening.
I think it's a good moment too, but I also think it's part of what falls flat. I think this would be a better episode if that was actually the case, if they were testing their resolve for peace, but that's not where the episode goes. The episode goes in this other direction that ends up saying nothing, in my opinion, when we get towards the fourth act.
I will say this, Stephen, I think you've got a good criticism of it, because I want to echo that, when Kirk is talking to Lincoln, we see in the background that Spock is talking to Serac. I think if you were to do this show now, this episode now, you would have, that filler stuff that you're talking about, remove those filler scenes, and you have the scenes with Spock and Serac having a conversation as a counter to what Lincoln and Kirk are talking about. So it becomes a more prevalent subplot throughout the movie, this idea of them questioning what's really going on here. Whereas Kirk and Lincoln are resorting to, okay, how do we fight them off? How do we stage this thing? How do we plan the battle? Serac and Spock are talking more about, why is this happening? What is going on? What's underneath all of this? We need to figure out what the actual impetus of all of this is. So it's a more active approach. So I think there are missing scenes that would have been great with them having the conversation that could have fleshed this episode out a little bit more. So yeah, you make excellent points, brother.
So we agree to let Serac go. And by the way, there are a couple of moments as we have Serac kind of walking off on his own that are very grainy in the film. And I wondered if they were opticals or, they didn't have the shot they wanted. And so they zoomed in on Serac optically and cut out something else in order to create that shot.
Well, there have been a few times in recent third season episodes where they didn't get the coverage they needed. And when they were in the editing room, they took an image of Kirk looking one way and they flipped the negative so that he's looking the right way. But as a result, you're seeing Kirk with his hair parted on the other side. You're seeing his insignia on the right side of his chest instead of the left side of his chest. Little sloppy things like that happened a little noticeably in the later part of the third season.
So Serac is approaching the bad guys and they decide not to kill him. And we have a long conversation that I don't think we need to go into detail.
Okay.
Of basically Colonel Green sort of playing along. I really like the guy who plays Colonel Green.
Yeah.
I find him to be a very persuasive version of that kind of a bad guy.
He's adequately evil. Yes.
Yeah. He's
adequately evil.
He's like, if you can't get Robert Blake, you got this guy at that time. It seems like that kind of vibe.
State your purpose.
I come in peace to propose peace.
Are you surrendering?
I'm doing what I consider best for all of us. If you choose to regard that as surrender, I accept your definition.
I think Serac is a really good character.
Yes.
I will say. But while this is happening, we see Kahless and Khan have snuck away. We know that they're going to sneak up behind him because we were just told in the previous scene that that's what Colonel Green likes to do, pretend to negotiate while his people attack.
You're very persuasive, Vulcan. I'd like to come out of this with a whole skin. Perhaps I can convince my associates that it would be to their advantage also.
And then we cut to Kirk and Spock, who are making some spears.
Your Serac is a brave man.
And Spock says, in another great line, I think,
Men of peace usually are, Captain.
And then again, there's a weird slowed down shot of Abraham Lincoln, which again looks like an optical to me. Yeah. And then we hear the scream and
help me, Spock.
Help me, Spock.
Oh, okay. This is laughable. First of all, Kirk and Spock and Lincoln are really smart. They're really smart people.
Yeah.
Like, why are they looking at each other, like pointing in the distance, going like, do you believe this guy? Do you really think we're going to believe this? Are you serious? It's like, it's laughable is what it is.
And it is also the end of Act 3. And we're going to come back in Act 4. We're going to hear more screams and more help me Spocks for a long time. And it's so funny. Like, I think Act 1 and 2 are pretty good.
Yeah.
I think Act 3 is setting up some stuff and it's okay. Although what it's setting up, I don't think quite makes sense. And Act 4 is we're taking a big step down.
Okay. Help me, Spock. And then you hear like, Spock, help me. And then you hear, ah.
And
so bad.
As we come back, they say they're trying to goad us into attacking, and that we shouldn't do it.
How can you ignore that?
A Vulcan would not cry out so.
So is he saying that it's an imitation, or he's saying that this illusion isn't really very good because Serac would never do that?
Oh, good question.
I think he's saying we're being duped.
Yeah.
You know,
I think Serac is probably dead.
Because Spock is very, even though he salutes the image of Serac, and he's not being as accepting to the image of Serac as he was to the image of Lincoln, I think. I think when he says a Vulcan will not cry out so, I think he's saying this is illusion or not, this ain't coming from no Vulcan.
And then this is, just where things kind of fall apart a little bit because Kirk he hears that, but then says, "Yeah, well, I can't listen to this anymore. I got to go attack."
I gotta go, man.
Yeah.
Which is really dumb.
Yeah.
And then Lincoln comes up, and I do find it really interesting that he kind of takes over.
I suggest that we do whatever they want.
Do what they want, sir?
Not the way they want it, however.
And he suggests that you two make an attack, make it look reckless, while I'm going to circle around and save Serac.
No.
James. Remember, I was something of a backwoodsman. I doubt that you could do what I was bred to.
I can't let you risk it, Mr. President.
This is all amazingly established, this image of Lincoln. This was my jumping off point of Lincoln. All these little things talking about like comparing Kirk to Grant. I mean, and from there, everything I learned about Lincoln since that first moment when I saw this episode, like solidified performance. Yeah. It's really spectacular.
I can't let you risk it, Mr. President.
Well, I am no longer president. Mr. Spock, any comment?
No, sir.
And then Lincoln is just in charge now.
One matter further, gentlemen. We fight on their level with trickery, brutality, finality. We match their evil.
Yeah. Wow. Like, what do you think of that? Like when you hear, like, especially you, John, I mean, it sounds like you really know more about Lincoln and certainly have done a much, much deeper dive into his life and history. And you hear this version of Lincoln say those lines. Is that part of his character, or is he out of character?
This is accurate. And I think that's why I like it even more watching the episode now as I've become an adult, because when you read all this stuff, you have to come to terms. Listen, there are no great people without things. There aren't, I mean, that's the thing when you look at with him. And so leading a country is not easy. And during a civil war, and some of the things he had to do, some of the decisions he made from the outside, you can look at it and certainly be critical of it, but he wasn't afraid to bend the rules, to break them occasionally, because he believed there was a greater good. And so his idea that getting down in the mud with these guys and fighting at their level, that feels like Lincoln, because he has assessed the situation and he goes, we got to do what we got to do to get out of this situation. And if we got to revert to this, we revert to this. And then he follows it up by saying, I sent 100,000 men to their deaths doing, so I understand the weight of what I'm saying and I understand what I need to do when I need to do it. And this is the thing that sometimes people get caught up in the glossy-eyed view of Lincoln, and Lincoln was a pragmatist. And it's been reported, if he could have ended the Civil War without freeing the slaves, he'd have done it. And so you have to factor that into this whole situation of how you assess Lincoln overall. There's historical records of the things that he has said and done and what have you. So, he's a pragmatist at the end of the day. It's just he had that energy that people, for whatever reason, gravitated to and loved.
Amazing.
And these are all really, really good lines.
Yeah.
There's no honorable way to kill. No gentle way to destroy. There's nothing good in war except its ending.
Now, that is not a Lincoln quote. That is a Star Trek quote.
Yeah.
But it's a good quote. Here's the thing. I think all this is good dialogue. I agree with what John said, obviously, about Lincoln. I mean, I think he is a great man. And yes, the brutality of that war, he was the commander in chief. So I agree with all that. I think structurally, this is totally off the rails for the episode. And the reason is because the point of the episode, what we've been set up with, is we are going to see a battle between good and evil to see which one is stronger.
Mm-hmm.
That is the situation they've set up. And the most good guy just said, let's be evil.
Yep.
That is exactly what he said.
I'm going to disagree with you. He did not say let's be evil. He said, these are the tactics they're going to use. We have to beat them at their game because we are the good people. And in the end, we are going to do good things if we can get through this situation. That's where he resorted to.
But doesn't that mean, first of all, John, I agree with you. But if he's saying we have to match them, is it not saying that we're just as bad as them?
You ask me that question, and I'm a person with the mentality of, if they're going to reject peace, then we've got to do what we've got to do because the survival of the greater good of everyone is more important than being allowing evil to win. If you allow evil to win by pussyfooting around evil all the time, guess what? You're going to end up in a bad situation. You're going to end up in chains. And I think you have to fight back and once you realize how you need to fight back, then you take that into your own hands. And Lincoln would have absolutely done that.
Right.
And I think that's where it's, and I don't think, and we'll just have to disagree because I don't think he's saying for them to be evil. He's saying they're going to trick us. They're going to do it. We've got to fight at their level to beat them and use their tactics against them. And that's what we're doing. They're not saying we're going to enslave them and torture them and experiment on their bodies and we're going to enslave them because they're ethnicity or their sexual identity or whatever. No, we're going to beat them at their game because we have to win this battle so that we can survive and your ship can be free.
Right. That's the greater good is saving the Enterprise.
Yeah.
So, first of all, he does literally say we match their evil.
Okay, fair. Match doesn't mean we become evil.
But I don't disagree with anything you've said. Mm-hmm. I think I don't disagree with Lincoln in this moment. I mean, like the ship's at stake. We're all going to die. These aren't like an army where there are a bunch of good people in the army I fight. These are like purely evil people. Yeah, that is who they are. These are the worst of the worst. I have no problem with any of that. I have a problem with the episode. Is that if you compare this to Arena is all about Kirk making the choice not to kill. Mm-hmm. He's being judged and he finds a way to not do an evil thing, even though he's in a fight to the death with a guy who's trying to kill him.
Right.
This episode is asking the same question. And we even have the Serac moment where he says, maybe what's being tested is our resolve. Mm-hmm. Well, if that had been the case, like if you'd done this whole episode and in the end, Kirk chooses not to kill and they go, I can't do this. You're going to have to kill me. And they go, you've proven your point. If it was more of an ending like Arena, that's what I mean is that the episode asks the question, how does good fight differently from evil? And the episode's answer to that is it doesn't.
Well, to your point, Steve, when you're looking at Arena, when you were looking at Spectre of the Gun, and Kirk has that moment where he decides not to kill.
Yeah.
He decides that is where good triumphs over evil. Mm-hmm. And that is where Kirk said in completely different ways, we can admit that we're killers, but we're not going to kill today. Mm-hmm. That epiphany, that triumph of good over evil, even though the fate of the Enterprise is on the line, that's the sort of shining moment of good that this episode is missing.
Exactly.
But having said that, John, I agree with everything.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Your campaign, Mr. President.
Which I think is really interesting that he's, said, you're the boss.
Yeah.
And we're with the bad guys. And here comes Kirk and Spock, who start throwing spears at them. By the way, I just want to point out, it takes a long time to actually make a good spear. Second of all, spears in general are not throwing weapons. It's like, and the worse and the more like gnarled and not straight the spear is, the less good it is going to be for throwing. This is a ridiculous use of this weapon. But anyway, so they start throwing spears and Lincoln spots Serac, sitting up, facing away from him.
It was a worthy effort, Serac. Worthy. No need to blame yourself for its failure.
Was there any time that you were thinking that this was going to work out okay?
Not one bit. Never. Nope. Ever. Never.
And he gets up to him and he's untying him and he's still talking to him. And then Serac falls over because, of course, he's dead. And this is where we find out that Kahless can imitate voices.
Help me, Spock.
And that's why he was Kahless the Unforgettable, because he can imitate voices.
You should have caught his act at the Copa. I mean, it was really, really something special. And by the way, so you ever have a thing where you quoted a quote with your friends only years later to find out that you had been misquoting the quote?
Yeah, sure. Beam me up, Scotty. People do that all the time.
So on the email where we set up the our meeting to record this episode, the subject of my email was "Now do Lincoln," because my friends all the time said "Now do Lincoln," when in fact the quote is "Now can you cry like Lincoln?"
Yeah.
Yep.
He does not say "Now do Lincoln," and it was really upsetting when I got there. I was like, I've been saying that for years. He doesn't say that.
Now can you cry like Lincoln?
Help me, Kirk.
Why was he having him imitate calling as Lincoln when they're just gonna kill Lincoln and send him out front anyway?
That was a weird one. I agree with that. That's I agree with that criticism. That was strange, you know.
So there's a rustle, and Spock and Kirk are watching, and Lincoln appears walking straight forward, very stiffly, hands behind his back.
James, stay back.
And then he just falls forward, and the spear is sticking out of his back. First of all, by 1969 standards, when this aired, that's pretty grisly for primetime television to see this big friggin' spear sticking out of the guy's back. Remember in Galileo 7 when Latimer got killed by the spear thrown by the big ape creature, and then you see the other guy go down, and his body is covered with this really awful looking fog. So you didn't see the spear sticking out of his back. And actually, as grisly as it still is by today's standards, it was actually supposed to be much, much worse. In one of the earlier versions, instead of Lincoln walking up and falling forward with a spear out of his back, Kirk and Spock were supposed to be beside a cliff. And Green and Kalis were at the top of the cliff, looking down on Kirk and Spock, and threw Lincoln's body over the cliff, and he landed in front of Kirk and Spock.
Oh my God.
Jesus.
Ouch. That would have been much, much worse.
Jesus.
And I gotta say, it's sad watching Lincoln die.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still is.
Yeah. And then we end up in a pretty dumb fight scene.
Yeah.
With the two of them against the four bad guys. At one point, again, no Vulcan neck pinches, no smart fighting, no tactics at all. Kirk tackles Green. I don't think he kills him.
Well, he's like
got
he
a
tackles
knife
him, but the knife is behind Green, or the half of the spear is behind Green's back. So maybe he fell on the spear, but you're right. It's not. It's not
clear.
Stress that he's dead. Yeah.
And then, despite the fact that it's 4 against 2 or 3 against 2, the others just run off.
Yeah.
And they go, well, I guess you win.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It feels very rushed. Like, okay, let's wrap this up.
It would seem that evil retreats when forcibly confronted. However, you have failed to demonstrate to me any other difference between your philosophies. Your good and your evil use the same methods, achieve the same results.
Which is kind of like my feeling. It's like and by the way, the only truly good thing that anyone did was Serac. Other than that, he tried to sue for peace. Other than that, this episode sets up all these ideas, but doesn't really deal with them.
And I just realized that my point that I said before about that "no, I won't kill you" moment, how that was missing. It actually was there. It was right there with Serac. Yeah. Serac said, "I'm not going to kill you."
Yeah.
So Kirk probably looked at that and said, well, that "no, I won't kill you" moment isn't going to fly here, so I can't even go there.
Well, that's what I wonder what Gene is trying to say with this episode, and what is he trying to say about this idea of, because he gives, or who's the other writer who, I guess they wrote the last 2 acts?
Arthur Heinemann. Yeah. Arthur Heinemann wrote the last 2 acts. That's
okay.
Right.
Heinemann's making a commentary about this idea that good and evil, just like you were saying, Steve, the tactics are the same. They didn't separate them. They both commit the same kind of things, yet one calls themselves good, the other calls themselves evil, and the good called them evil, and vice versa, And so, and again, 1968, riots in the street, Vietnam, all this stuff is happening where the country is dividing between the unsilent majority, as Nixon calls them, or the silent majority, as Nixon called them, and the unsilent minority that was protesting in the streets and doing all these things, and which we're still doing today. The battle between the haves and the have-nots, what we determine to be good, what we determine to be evil, depending on your perspective. It's the same thing. And I wonder if maybe he was saying, by having this rock creature say this, like, you are all able to do this. You're all capable of being evil, yet you claim that you're good. And so there's no real confrontation of this thing that he says. So it may be that Heinemann was trying to make a commentary, like as he saw some of the liberals start to turn and use some of those tactics that they were supposedly against, as he saw some of these other things going on and some of the disillusion going on in politics. Maybe it may just be a commentary that, people call themselves good in our society, but in fact, everyone's capable of the kind of evil that they complain other people are doing.
I think those are great comments, and I think you're giving the show more credit than it deserves.
Well, I did say I'm John Roca, and I've come to defend the Savage.
Yeah, you did.
So after Kirk sort of gets a little bit mad at the rock creature for pulling this on people, he says,
"We came in peace.
And you may go in peace."
And so we beam back up to the bridge, and Kirk kind of goes around and checks with everybody, and they speculate a little bit about what the creatures did, and then he says,
He seems so real. And to me, especially Mr. Lincoln, I feel I actually met Lincoln.
This is a big, like, Kirk went from embracing Lincoln, going further with him than he probably should have, like letting his admiration for Lincoln probably cloud his judgment as, the captain of the Enterprise and responsible for 428 people. But then he, when they get down to the planet's surface and, he's like, okay, that's it. I'm done playing. And then now he is seen, like he saw Lincoln die with his own eyes. He didn't just read about it. Like he saw it happen. And like John, like you pointed out, the way he both of you guys pointed out, the way he lets Lincoln take charge when they're on Excalibur. And now he's back on the Enterprise and he's like, well, I met Lincoln. He's like, it's hitting him,
Well, also because like at the beginning of the episode, he's questioning the whole thing, right? Is it really him? Is it not him?
Yep.
Whatever. And so he's going through this process. So by the end, he accepts that it is him and feels it because he says, seeing him die again, I know the feelings now. I can actually sense what that was like, and so it's a big deal for that experience for him as Kirk. And where he's, and as you said, Steve, at the beginning of this, like he's melancholy almost a little bit about that they're almost done with the series. And I'm sure they knew by this time that it was, at the end. So there's almost a kind of reflective approach to the words and the lines that he's saying here at the end of this episode that I found to be interesting.
That's a really good point, Steve. John, that's a really good point because, they knew, the end was near, and there's more poignancy in Kirk's reflection on Lincoln when you consider that this was the end of the road almost.
It was so hard for me to see him die again. I feel I understand what Earth must have gone through to achieve final peace.
And again, remember, this is 1968. Robert Kennedy's been assassinated. Martin Luther King's been assassinated. So this idea of watching a world leader or someone you love and respect, someone who stands for your morals or your values for the people who believed in Martin Luther King and believed in Robert Kennedy, I think it was addressing that a little bit and kind of making that connection, because the people who watched John Kennedy die or heard about John, 5 years later, the brother dies. Maybe you're 7 years old when John Kennedy dies, and you're 12 when Robert Kennedy dies. So it's a different thing. It's a shared experience between parents and children, almost depending on what age they were.
That's a really good point, John, because in '63, obviously the world changed in an earth-shattering moment when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and like you said, 5 years later, not even. Bobby Kennedy, in LA at the Ambassador Hotel. And now viewers are watching this show and they're watching Lincoln die. I mean, I never even thought about that. But I mean, it's just a TV show, but still, Lincoln, probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest president that this country ever had, flaws and all. And what an impact that must have been, so close to losing a president and a presidential hopeful.
And mythologized. Remember that song, Abraham, Martin, and John? There is that connection, the Kennedys to Lincoln, to Martin Luther King Jr. So there is that connection. And so this is right catching the country's mood, I think, a little bit.
I agree with all of this, and all of this makes me wish this was a better episode because it is powerful, and Lincoln's death does move me.
Yeah.
But it's all kind of so senseless and not really figured out, and it's not, you know what I mean? Like it's Lincoln is just kind of dumb, and he dies kind of for nothing, which I guess he died kind of for nothing in the real world. But
Yeah.
I just wish that they had set all this up in a better way. It could have been a hugely powerful episode if it all really worked, which I think it doesn't. You know,
Listen here, you grumpy Gus. It worked for me, and it was powerful for me.
Yeah, but you know what, Steve, you know, you are right in a couple of respects there too, because like both you guys pointed out, you know, the first two acts were written by Roddenberry and it feels like it. The third and fourth act were not written by Roddenberry and it feels like it. And also like so many third season episodes, especially the later ones, there's this like rushed feeling towards the end. That final fight is so lame and they just run off and they're victorious. Like, really, that's it?
I mean, if Lincoln had sacrificed himself, you know what I mean, in a dramatic way to save Kirk and Spock, it would have proven the power of good, which is what this episode sort of fails to do, and B, been a more dramatic, you know, I mean, and like I said, him walking out there with the spear in his back is dramatic. It definitely is. Yeah. By the way, it reminds me, John, years ago when we did the Civil War documentary, and there's this moment where Ken Burns and his crew are in the mix, which means they're putting all the sound together. This is the very end of the process of making a movie. Yeah. And they're, you know, over budget and they're out of time and they're rushing to get through the movie. And then Ken Burns' assistant runs into the mix room and says, "Wait, stop." Because they realized they were about to lay down the sound of the gunshot that killed Lincoln.
Oh wow. Ooh.
And they said, "Well, we can't just rush through this." And they all stopped. And the mix guy is going, "Hey, time is money. We got to go. And they're like, "No." And they sat and just contemplated it for a moment before they laid down those final sounds and assassinated Abraham Lincoln. And I just thought about this. It was so hard to watch him die again.
Yeah.
Moment, you know. And then there's one more interesting moment, I think, at the end of this episode, as they're, you know, doing their typical, okay, let's head out of orbit to our next assignment. We hear
there's still so much of their work to be done in the galaxy.
I mean, how can you not look at that line as a way of them saying, we would have liked to continue the show if we could have. There was more to do. And then also saying a commentary on, our world and our global world, saying there's still so much work to do in our world, in our America, in our, you know, Earth. There is so much here. So that line has so much meaning because, again, they know they're ending the show and they won't be able to maybe impart these lessons in different projects. So they're going to go out swinging.
Well, it's funny.
The Bible.
They didn't know, and now look at all the other Star Trek shows and movies that followed.
Right.
But also, fellas, those words. There's still so much of their work to be done in the galaxy, and there's even more of their work to be done today because, in so many ways, so much has gotten deeper and more complex.
Yeah.
Since, when this episode was filmed in 1968, people who say, 1968 was like the worst year this country ever had. And up until like 2020, it was. But then in the 2020, you had not just the pandemic, but so much other stuff going on. I mean, it was really, really nuts. Those words resonate much, much deeper because there's still so much more of their work to be done today.
And that is the ship flies off as the end of the Savage Curtain.
The end of the Savage Curtain. But do not fret. Not only will you see Kahless the Unforgettable again, like we pointed out in the Next Generation episode, Rightful Heir, but Colonel Green will return in the episode of Enterprise called Demons, and Sorak will return in the episode of Enterprise called Awakening, and just when you thought you'd seen the last of Colonel Green's red uniform, why don't you take a good look at Colonel Green wearing that red uniform? And then, are you ready, fellas? Take a look at Robin Williams wearing that same uniform in Mork and Mindy.
That is crazy.
Wow.
Steve has always pointed out how much he loves when, he sees like, oh, they're saving some money. So Mork and Mindy actually saved money on the wardrobe by repurposing Colonel Green's uniform.
What's really crazy about that one is like, because we saw before in like Cat's Paw and stuff like this, where, we reuse a prop or something like that. Mork's uniform, that is the key to the show. That's the most important costume in the show. And the fact that they would go back, I don't know when Mork and Mindy started, probably like 1980 or something, but like that they would go back to a 1968 episode of Star Trek to steal Mork's uniform is pretty nuts.
It sure is.
And he first showed up in Happy Days. So that's the set.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Actually that makes sense because they just didn't expect Mork to be a key character. No. They just thought he was a one shot.
Right.
So they're like, we just need to, get a cheap costume.
And Paramount produced Happy Days, just like by the third season of Star Trek, they were producing Star Trek.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
So, what did other people have to say about this episode, Scott?
Well, producer Fred Freiberger said there was a lot, and just touching on what John just said, there was a sense of doom on the last few shows because you could sense the rumors going around that the network wasn't picking Star Trek up.
Oh, wow.
Towards the end of the season, morale was pretty low. And I definitely picked that up when we were watching the previous episode, Requiem for Methuselah. So Teleplay co-writer Arthur Heineman said, when Gene Kuhn left, much of the quality of the original show was lost. When Fred Freiberger took over, I felt like it was being cheapened. The ideas during the third season weren't as good, and it seemed as though he didn't care as much. I mean, he was a nice guy, but he always seemed frantic, and I couldn't tell why. My feeling was that when he was in his frantic moments, he would make decisions that weren't right for the show. I mean, valid. I mean, and he was there. Mm-hmm. Leonard Nimoy said about this episode, that one didn't work very well, as I recall. It was an interesting attempt that did not really come to like 77 years. And Philip Pine, who played Colonel Green, ending our recollections on a good note, he said, I was really fortunate that Paramount didn't know how Star Trek struck I was at the time, or they would have made me pay them to appear on the show. Oh. I had always been a fan of Gene Roddenberry's work, and I jumped at the opportunity to appear in a series that I personally enjoyed watching every week. I was pleased to be a part of it, and I thought the character of Green was really well written.
I guess I'll give my final thoughts first. Here's what I think. This is one where I don't think the whole is not greater than the sum of its parts. Like I think we've already talked about how much we all love Lincoln and the portrayal of him and how moving it was to us. And I feel all of that. I love Kirk's, being with his hero and the effect it has. There's so many very, very Star Trek moments, including the Uhura one, including talking about peace and sacrifice and all those things. That all stuff all really works. The thing that doesn't work to me is this is a movie that asks the question, is good stronger than evil? And it completely fails to answer that question. In fact, all it does is kind of go, we don't really show a lot of difference, and the only person who does a truly good action is not one of our main characters. It's Serac, and it ends up being useless, right. And so like the structurally, the whole it just fails for me while I enjoy watching the parts of it that I really like watching it. And I guess this kind of goes, we're getting very near the end of the series. Is something that I said way back at the beginning of my love for Star Trek is unconditional love.
Yeah.
Is that I can love watching an episode like The Savage Curtain for the things that are good in it and just accept the things that I don't think quite work because of how much I love these characters and I love this world.
Excellent point. Johnny, what are your final thoughts on The Savage Curtain?
My final thoughts are that it's still a episode that holds a very special place in my heart. I absolutely agree that there are issues with the episode, that it doesn't 100% work in certain ways narratively, and the structure of it sometimes can be a bit weird, or as some people have called it, cheesy. But for me, emotionally, the power is still there. Emotionally, the journey is not Spock's journey, it's Kirk's journey. And if they nail that, then the other stuff that kind of doesn't quite come up to snuff is okay by me in an episode like this, because I felt Kirk's love of Lincoln. I felt Kirk's honor and respect and awe of Lincoln. I felt his growing friendship with Lincoln. and then I felt him lose Lincoln. And so for that, it carries weight for me as a fan of Lincoln myself and a fan of James Tiberius Kirk. It carries weight with me, and I will always love this episode for that reason, even though I recognize its faults. It's like loving a family member. They got some things you don't agree with, but overall, they're still your family. This episode's still my family, and I will always defend it for what it does accomplish, which is giving you a good emotional arc for these two characters that were the central characters of this episode.
Well, I'm grateful, John, that you joined us for this one, because by defending the Savage Curtain and just the conversation that we had, this is another episode, the Savage Curtain, that went up in my estimation after our deep dive. There have been quite a few episodes that have gone way up after our deep dive conversation, Steve. And the fact that happened on even just one episode, let alone quite a few, like obviously Miri is definitely, I think that was the first one that I really went, holy moly, this episode is actually really good. But also The Deadly Gears was one that went up in my estimation. I already liked that one. I already liked Return of the Archons. That conversation was amazing. And this one, John, you definitely helped me appreciate this episode a whole lot more. Like I said, not an episode that I watched a whole lot, but when I watched it, I like it. I think I like it a whole lot more because it has some really great moments. The performance of the actor who plays Lincoln is just, he really sells it. He really sells it. And Kirk, his admiration of Lincoln, Shatner also really, really sells it. Their chemistry is terrific. I thought the alien, the Excalbian was really cool, the costume design. And Steve, I agree with you that compared to an episode like Arena, this definitely falls short of having that impact. But still, it's an episode that I enjoy. I think I enjoy it a whole lot more. I have a much deeper appreciation for it. I got to say to John Rocha that, having you on for this not only sticks the landing of Enterprise Incidents, but if I haven't said this before, doing Enterprise Incidents, for everyone listening, for all the Enterprisers who have been listening all this time, we would not be doing Enterprise Incidents if it was not for John Stephen Rocha, because John brought me on to do an episode of the Cinephiles on the Wrath of Khan, which is where I met my great new friend, Steve Morris. And that was how Steve Morris, for a very long time, said, we got to do Star Trek. And I finally said, okay, let's do it. And here we are doing Enterprise Incidents. So it all started with John Stephen Rocha, the outlaw himself, and the joy, the enlightenment, gaining a brand new friend in Steve Morris. I owe it all to you, John Rocha. I am eternally grateful for deepening a love I have for Star Trek and making me love something more that I just did not think it was possible. So thank you, my friend.
That's very kind of you, Scott. Very kind. You all put it all together. You all did your thing. I just, whatever part I played in it is my joy, because it's been so much fun to come on and have these conversations with you guys. And just as much fun as having you on the Cinephiles to break down all the movies that we do. No, honestly, you're one of our favorite guests. I know Steve and I always look forward to doing it and having fun conversations with you, because your mind for film is incredible, Scott. It is incredible. And so getting a chance to share it on both on TV and film has been a blast. So, it's very kind words, but you guys put the show together and constructed it and deserve all the credit. So thank you. But thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Yes, great. Sir.
I approve everything that was just said. Thank you, John and Scott, for having all of this happen. And that is what we think of the Savage Curtain. Of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Facebook. If you're a Facebook person, you could search for Enterprise Incidents. If you're a Twitter person, and at the moment of this recording, I don't know there's going to be Twitter. But if there is, it's Enter Incidents on Twitter, Enterprise Incidents on Instagram, which will probably stay around a little bit longer. Please subscribe to the show if you haven't already on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or Spotify or Overcast or Stitcher or all those other places, wherever you want to subscribe. please do. And if there's an opportunity to leave a review, which there certainly is on Apple Podcasts, please leave a review of Enterprise Incidents. And if you want to support the show, all the hard work we've done, it would really be appreciated. If you just look at the show notes, there is a link to Anchor where you can support the show for as little as 99 cents a month or as much as $9.99 a month. And you could just think of it as like, hey, I enjoyed that. I'm going to just throw these guys a tip. We definitely appreciate it. And if you want to find me, you can do it at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. And, I always try to mention an episode of The Cinephiles, which I do with my partner, John Stephen Roca, every week. And, of course, there's no episodes. I already mentioned what they were. John and I both agree these might be two of our finest episodes ever, and that is our 2 episodes on Ken Burns' Civil War.
Yeah.
Scott, how do people find you?
Well, before you can tell you where you can find me, I want to know where we can find John Stephen Roca, because he is quite literally the hardest working man in show business. He is everywhere. He's and all the work he is doing on all the various shows and podcasts. Everything he is doing is absolutely stellar. If you are not following him, if you are not subscribing to his YouTube channel, you are seriously missing out on some of the finest commentary on film and TV you will find anywhere, all over the web. So, Johnny, where can people find you?
Thank you again, Scott. You can find me at The Roca Says on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, The Outlaw Nation on Twitch. Definitely follow me on Twitch. The World Cup's about, I guess, will this be out by the time of the World Cup, or when is this one coming out? It's going to be
it's coming out tonight.
Oh, okay, great. And the World Cup is coming up, and I'm going to be doing some live watch-alongs on my new sports channel that's called Game Time, and also on Twitch. So I'll be doing those back and forth. So definitely follow me there and follow that channel and my other podcasts, the Cinephiles that I do with Steve Morris, the Top 10, the Geek Buddies, and the Hot Mic, which I do with Jeff Snyder, who's also a friend of Scott Manson's.
Jeff Snyder, what a guy! Yes, I love it. We're all like brothers. We're all family. So sure. For the time being, you can follow me on Twitter at MovieMans. You can still find me on Instagram at MovieMans. And like Steve said, please be sure to support us through Anchor. I mean, this has been the ultimate labor of love, but we would appreciate any donations, any support you can provide. So much appreciated. And this is really important. Make sure you follow us on our Facebook page, Enterprise Incidents, because to all the enterprises who are already listening, if you are not following us on our Facebook page, you're going to want to do so, because in just a few days or so, we are going to be making a very big announcement about our very special guest that we are having on our very next episode of Enterprise Incidents, our deep dive on all our yesterdays. When that deep dive is finished, we're going to have an interview exclusive to Enterprise Incidents, and we are going out on the biggest possible note. Who could this special guest possibly be? We are not going to say right here on this episode of Enterprise Incidents, because we want to make the announcement on our Facebook page. But believe me, everyone listening to Enterprise Incidents is going to want to listen to our very next episode of Enterprise Incidents, when we are covering an episode that I'm very excited to do. I didn't want to rush to get to this point, but now that we are finally here, All Our Yesterdays is one of my very favorite episodes of Star Trek, and not just because it is photo novel number 6, but All Our Yesterdays is next on Enterprise Incidents. So as we are closing down our voyage through the original series with only 2 episodes to go, I cannot believe I am saying that, only 2 episodes to go. Join us next time, and until then, keep going boldly.